Hello all, it's Pastor Chris with the message for July 7th, 2024. I pastor the First Cumberland Presbyterian Church in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. We are an open and affirming church, standing against racism and bigotry. We'd love for you to join us. We meet on Sunday mornings at 10:55 a.m. at 907 East Main Street. Come, check us out. Today's message is another in the series of things you've never heard preached. It's a weird story about a true hero of the Old Testament. It's found in Genesis chapter 9, verses 18 through 29. It says, "The sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was peopled. Noah, a man of the soil, was the first to plant a vineyard. He drank some of the wine and became drunk, and he lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it both on their shoulders, and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, 'Cursed be Canaan, lowest of slaves shall he be to his brothers.' He also said, 'Blessed by the Lord my God be Shem, and let Canaan be his slave. May God make space for Japheth, and let him live in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his slave.' After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died." My sermon title today is Noah the Sot. Have you ever heard of a Just So story? There's a collection of these published by Rudyard Kipling in the early days of the 20th century. Now, the stories began as bedtime stories for his daughter Effie, and she knew them so well that if he deviated at all in the way they were told, she would sit up in bed and correct him. These stories are origin stories about things like how the rhinoceros got its horn or how the leopard got its spots. Now, some of you might remember years ago I shared a story about how the opossum got its tail, as told by a Cumberland Presbyterian pastor from the Choctaw Presbytery, whose name was Randy Jacob. But today I'm going to tell another Just So story from a Vietnamese folktale about how the tiger got its stripes. Tiger was the proudest beast in all of Vietnam. Tiger had a beautiful orange coat of which he was extremely proud. He commanded all the animals in the entire forest, except for one, the water buffalo. Water buffalo was bigger than Tiger and had horns of its own, and therefore didn't listen to Tiger's commands. This enraged Tiger, but he didn't know what to do about it. But one day, Tiger was walking through the forest, and he came upon an area where there used to be trees. The ground was clear. What had happened? He waited and watched. And before long, here came Water Buffalo, tied to some sort of machine and led by a small, two-legged animal. And Water Buffalo was doing whatever this little animal said. That night, when Water Buffalo came to get water, Tiger asked her why she listened to this small two-legged animal. She said that animal was a human, and she listened to it because humans have something Tiger never will: wisdom. Tiger bragged that he would get wisdom from this small animal. The next day, Tiger waited. Here came the human with some goats. Tiger pounced and said to the human, "Give me wisdom." The human was afraid and replied he would surely give Tiger wisdom. It was just over in his house, and if Tiger would just come with him, he'd gladly give it to him. "Oh, but wait," the human said, You're too big to come into my house. I'll go get it and bring it to you." And Tiger agreed. But the human said, "No, wait, if I leave you here, you might eat my goats. To save you from temptation, I'll tie your tail to the tree." Tiger thought that sounded reasonable. "But wait," the human said, "if I tie only your tail, you could easily get away. I better tie your entire body and your head to the tree." Tiger wanted wisdom so badly, he agreed. The human left, and Tiger waited there, tied by a rope to the tree all day long. What was taking the human so long? The sun blazed hot. The rope burned into Tiger's skin. When night fell, he knew he'd been tricked, so he began to chew on the ropes to free himself. He was tired and thirsty and hungry, and it took a while, but finally he was free. And when he went to get some water, he saw his reflection in the pool. Where the rope had been, he had stripes. Water buffalo came along and said, "I told you would never have wisdom." And now Tiger is not so proud, but slinks around hiding in the forest. Sometimes we have stories like this in our scripture too. Why are things the way they are? Why is it so hard to grow food? Why does childbirth hurt so much? Why don't we all speak the same language? Where did that big pillar of salt come from? And much like these just so stories, the Bible gives us answers. Now, modern people are divided on which of these answers we're intended to take as history and which are intended to be just as fanciful as the story of Tiger and its stripes. The story from Noah's post-flood experience is one of these. Now, let's take a moment to review what's happened up to this point. God saw that the world was in trouble, even though God made all things. And when God did that, God said, "It was very good." God now sees that every inclination of the human heart is bent toward evil. Now, this is only 10 generations into human existence, and God determines to wipe everything out. Somehow, Noah receives God's acceptance, and he and his family are spared. Now, here are some things we don't have time for in this sermon. Where did all this water come from? Was this the first rainfall? What about the water coming up from the ground? How did Noah get all those animals there? Was there really room enough for all the animals? What about the food for the animals? What about their waste? Etc., etc. Those are all good and interesting questions. I actually studied them this week. I have some ideas, but I just don't have time to get into them during this message. But this story about Noah and his sons, I mean, what a weird one. Noah is kind of like Adam in Scripture. Like Adam, he's the source of all people. Like Adam, he has 3 sons. Like Adam, one of them becomes the father of the good guys, the other 2 are iffy. But how did it come to be that way? The Scripture also tells us Noah was the first person ever to plant a vineyard and make wine. Okay, let's just accept that. Maybe that means this was the first time anyone had ever gotten totally drunk. And Noah was so drunk, he passed out completely nude on the floor of his tent. Don't picture this in your head or anything. After all, he was like 600 years old when it first started to rain. I'm not age shaming, but 600 is pretty old. Anyway, his son Ham walked in and saw him there. Now, people have often wondered what the terrible thing was that happened that made Noah so angry. And people have filled in the gaps with all kinds of possibilities. But you know, the Bible is usually pretty blunt about stuff like this. If something really weird happened, Scripture would probably mention it. Nakedness in this culture was exceptionally shameful. And more so for the person viewing the nakedness than the naked person. Now that may sound funny to us, but that's just the way it was. So Ham's big sin was just seeing Noah that way and then going out and telling people about it instead of covering him up and keeping his mouth shut. That was enough to make his brothers angry at him, and it was enough to make Noah want to curse him when he woke up. But the curse is the weird part. Noah curses Ham's son, not Ham himself. And the language suggests that Ham was the youngest child, even though he's always listed second, which probably indicates birth order. So why was Canaan cursed instead of Ham? Well, one possibility is that there were 2 lists of Noah's sons from different sources. The first list was Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The The second list was Shem, Japheth, and Canaan. And the editing of the stories together is pretty stilted if that was the case, but that might explain the difference. Whether that's the case or not, the story is written down at a later time when there's this great dislike, distrust, and competition with the Canaanites. So to look back and see that God had cursed them so that their God-given position was to be enslaved to the sons of Shem, the descendants of Shem, the people who became the Israelites, and the descendants of Japheth, other people, including people like the Philistines, with whom the Israelites at some times had treaties and cooperative pacts, who end up with a place alongside the descendants of Shem. I mean, this makes total sense as a just so story. We're at war with the Canaanites. Philistines are okay, at least right now, not as good as us. The Hamites, supposedly now the Egyptians, aren't on our bad side at this time, but the Canaanites, those folks need to be destroyed. Oh, and you know why? Because all those years ago, Noah got drunk and Ham walked in on him and shamed him. And so Noah cursed Canaan because of this. Notice, by the way, that Noah curses Canaan on his own. He doesn't ask God for the curse, but he does ask God for blessings for Shem and Japheth. And so, this legend about Noah, the first winemaker, turns into a story that's used for nationalistic purposes to show that the Israelites ought to enslave or destroy another nation, the Canaanites. Now, just a brief note that I can't leave out. In the history of Bible interpretation, some people have used this passage to justify the abhorrent institution of slavery. Now, we have to be honest that the Bible has no really negative or positive message about slavery. It's just part of the culture. But in the history of the United States, this particular passage was used to justify the enslavement of Africans, claiming that they are descendants of Canaan and therefore were selected by God to be slaves of others. This interpretation is wrong, bogus, mistaken, supremacist, awful, and many other qualifying words that mean bad. There is no evidence in the text itself that this is what the text refers to, no reason to believe that the descendants of Canaan had a different skin color than others in that region, or that Canaan had a different skin color than his father or his uncles. There's nothing like that. But some people use this as proof that slavery was indeed a legitimate institution and that white people deserved to own people of color. And friends, that wasn't that long ago. Just to think how the Bible has been used to perpetrate a people's subjugation is heart-wrenching to me. One more quick thing. There is no judgment about Noah's drunkenness. Kind of strange, but the problem wasn't that he got so drunk that he passed out. The problem was that his son saw him naked. This does not mean that getting passed out drunk is a good thing in the Bible. But we might expect that it would at least be mentioned. So, there we go. Another weird story written probably as propaganda against an entire nation. And now, hard to even begin to understand. Only when we peel back the layers of the scriptures and get an idea of when, why, and who wrote this stuff do we get some idea of what these weird things mean. Our interpretation has got to be more sophisticated than God said it, I believe it, that settles it. Without a look into the how and why and who, we can come to some really weird conclusions about these kinds of things. So, takeaway from today's scripture: don't look at drunk naked people, but if you do stumble across one, cover them up and don't go gossip about it. God bless.